And I think before you'd queue outside H&M, you should go and use the New Zealand version of the fashion app, which is called Good On You, and just see if they're holding firm with some of their bids to be more sustainable. I think they're probably your best bet in a bad world of clothing, but I would go to Dunedin Senorita Orsimo, who makes recycled clothing, before I went to H&M, quite frankly.
I'm glad you mentioned the Good On You app. I think Jennifer Whitty knows about that from Massey University. Jennifer is a senior lecturer and research in design. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me on. I know about Good On You through Beck McMaster, who brought it here to New Zealand from Australia, where it was developed. And I think it's fantastic because it puts the information and the choice back in the hands of the consumer so they can make up their mind. And it's advocating for hopefully a fully transparent fashion industry where we can make our mind up about the impacts that it's having, because unfortunately in contemporary society we tend to regard it as something lighthearted and frivolous with no kind of impact or gravitas, and that's sadly not the case. So we need to really broaden that conversation and reflect on what we're buying and try to break that cycle of addiction to cheap fashion that really actually does have a huge impact.
$25 billion worth of it a year from H&M. Jennifer, the fashion industry, I've seen this claimed, is the world's second biggest polluter behind the oil industry.
Yeah, that is actually getting disputed now, whether that is. In fact, it's very difficult to measure that, but it's one of the industries with the largest amount of impact. So there is a little bit more discussion around that. Because it's such a fractured industry that relies on subcontracting, it's hard to justify that. And a lot of that, the reason that it is such a high impact is because of its textile production, which a lot of that is affiliated with petrochemical, as 80% of the garments that are put into production now are made of polyester, which, if I'm not sure if you're aware, is a derivative of the oil industry, which I've had to enlighten some of my students around. So it's a hugely complex. I can understand how complex it is for the consumer to understand. Like, I work in research in this area, and even recently, I'm not sure if you're aware, but H&M, there was a report by a Danish journalist that actually investigated into their practices, that they're that they say that they are recycling, but that they've been burning 12 tons of textiles every year. That's come out in the last 2 weeks, and much of that has been new and unused. So they say that it is. So it's frightening. And at the moment, the technology is not there for them to actually recycle what they do. I think only about 2% of what that they've been having kind of bring back schemes. But it's also, I think, really important not to demonize. People don't know how complex this is, and we need to bring everybody on board to create some change. And that does also, involve across all of society. We're amplifying this hype through the media, through everything that, it's like the buzz of, I kind of equate it in terms of food, a sugar rush of fast fashion, as opposed to the kind of slow release of a slow release energy food. So, I think a lot of it actually falls on consumers' hands. I think that's really where the crux of the issue. We play a huge part, and that's where the primary change needs to come about. We need to be using our dollar more wisely and thinking about the impacts that it has.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer Whitty. Jennifer got through quite a lot of information there in an admirably short space of time, because time is what we're short of. Now, Michael Moynihan, thank you very much for being on the panel today.
My very great pleasure. And nice to talk to both of you.
Yes, and Lisa
thank
Scott.
you, Michael. Thank you, Jim. It was lovely.
Always a pleasure to converse with you both. Thanks, everybody. That's the panel for another day. And now it is Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, New Zealand has a new government. On the way to the swearing-in ceremony, I spoke to Jacinda Ardern in the car as she drove to Government House. After the swearing-in ceremony, there was a big get-together and a rapturous welcome at Parliament. Our gallery team was there. A new petrol tax for Aucklanders. The CEO of the Southern DHB tells us more about the backlog of 569 urology patients, just how many of them have been diagnosed with cancer while waiting too long for treatment. Kaikoura's rental squeeze, more affordable housing for Queenstown, as revealed by Andrew Little last night on Checkpoint. Teina Pora will get his inflation-adjusted compensation and more coming up.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The Prime Minister has revealed some very early details of the new government's plans. They include a possible mini-budget within the first 100 days and a dedicated child poverty unit. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The new Cabinet met for the first time this afternoon after being sworn in this morning. At their first substantive meeting next Tuesday, ministers will turn their attention to the 100 days plan, which may include a mini-budget. When deciding portfolios, Jacinda Ardern herself took on the responsibility for reducing child poverty. She intends to set up a unit in her department that will have oversight of the likes of child poverty measures. Ms Ardern says she's already started work with colleagues and officials on the ban on foreign purchases of existing residential homes. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Meanwhile, Ms Ardern says increasing Tēnā Pora's compensation is the fair and right thing to do. Mr Pora was wrongfully jailed for 2 decades for rape and murder of Susan Burdett, but after he was awarded $2.5 million compensation, the High Court ruled the sum should be raised to match inflation. The last government did not act on that ruling, but Ms Ardern says the new one will.
It was only fair that, given the criteria for setting that compensation was roughly 10 years old, that Mr Pora's compensation should also be inflation adjusted. The government took a different view. We contested that at the time and made a commitment that when we were in a position to do so, we would make sure we'd do what was fair and right.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The Auckland Council aims to bring in a regional fuel tax as soon as possible once the law has been changed to allow it. The new Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, will introduce amended legislation expediting the levy. The charge of 10 cents a litre will be used to help pay for $15 billion worth of light rail around the city, as well as new busways, bike paths and roading. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says the tax is the fairest way of raising the money needed to pay for new transport projects.
We didn't want to put it on general rates. People would rather see a specific tax, such as a fuel tax, that is hypothecated, that is, it's only to be used on transport infrastructure and not to be diverted into other areas of spending. That brings a greater certainty and a greater transparency.
Phil Goff says he'll meet with the government soon to see how quickly it can move on this. A lawyer says owners of quake-damaged homes in Christchurch are facing ruin because of poor repairs, and an inquiry is essential to finding out what went wrong. Thousands of homeowners have been battling the Earthquake Commission over failed assessments and substandard repair. Andrew Hooker, who is a specialist knowledge of many cases, says that 7 years on, he still gets calls from people who have just found out their homes were not properly repaired. He's welcoming news the incoming EQC Minister Megan Woods plans to push ahead with plans for an independent inquiry.
There are many claims where EQC has totally botched repairs and is now refusing to be accountable. So we need to get to the bottom of how this happened.
And Auckland lawyer Andrew Hooker. The Queenstown Lakes District Council has voted in favour of measures aimed at increasing the number of affordable homes in the town. Councillors unanimously backed the recommendations of a mayoral task force, which set the goal of having affordable homes for local workers by 2048. The initial target is to have 1,000 built by 2028. They'll be built on council-owned land, with people buying their house but leasing the land. The council also voted to add the Ladies' Mile area to the district's special housing area accord, where up to 2,185 homes could be built. The Vanuatu government has lifted the state of emergency for the volcanic island of Umbai, and its evacuees have returned. Umbai's 11,000 people had to be rapidly moved to nearby islands when the Manaro volcano began erupting last month. The Internal Affairs Minister, Alfred Ma'au, says it could be a month before life returns to normal. He says the islanders may be able to salvage food from their gardens, but there are emergency supplies.
We have a lot of supplies in stocks. The different clusters will do the final assessment as to whether and how much and when, and they need the food and other necessities to restore their normal living as they were when they left the island.
Alfred Ma'o says collecting clean water will still be a problem. It's 5 minutes past 5. The Kiwis fullback Roger Tuivasa-Sheck insists the lack of attention paid to Samoa has no bearing on his team's mindset for the team's opening game of the Rugby League World Cup. Most of the pre-tournament limelight has been on heavy title favourites Australia, the embattled New Zealand side and a Tongan squad featuring several players who had been expected to turn out for the Kiwis. Despite Samoa flying under the radar as a result, Tuivasa-Sheck says they expect a torrid battle in Auckland on Saturday.
We still sit down and we look at Samoa and all the other teams. They're all in the competition, and we don't look at any other team different. And with Samoa, they got a lot of former NRL players, a lot of experienced players in their team. So we just got to focus a lot on getting our stuff right and make sure that we don't take a backward step on Samoa.
Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. A strong performance from New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams has helped the Oklahoma City Thunder respond to back-to-back NBA losses with a 114-96 win over the Indiana Pacers. Adams scored 17 points and 11 rebounds as the Thunder made it 2 wins and 2 losses early in the new season. And both the men's and women's defending champions Jack Sock and Lauren Davis will be back to defend their titles at the ASB Tennis Classic in Auckland in just over 2 months' time. The women's tournament begins on New Year's Day and the men's on January the 8th. And that's the news.
A transport tax for Auckland.
If Auckland Council request it, we're going to legislate to bring back a regional fuel tax.
Autonomous ships.
Coming soon to a port near you, the crewless ship with a skipperless bridge.
And falling back to Earth.
How often are broken up spaceships falling down near the Pitcairn Islands?
Well, frequently, over a dozen times a year.
Moving coverage. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, award-winning film director Simon Bennett on bringing the New Zealand wars to life. And after 10, the great sagas of the Icelanders and their contemporary link to Australia. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers in Auckland and Coromandel clearing this afternoon. It will be cloudy tomorrow with showers. Waikato to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui, Taupō and Taihape. Fine today, rain tomorrow morning, briefly heavy north of Taupō, followed by scattered showers from the afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine spells and isolated showers, occasional rain developing north of Napier tomorrow, scattered showers elsewhere. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine with isolated showers tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson also mainly fine with scattered afternoon showers tomorrow, mainly about the ranges. Buller, Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, but a few showers about Fiordland. Canterbury, it's going to be fine there as well, apart from isolated showers from this evening. Often cloudy tomorrow with scattered showers, but they will mainly be inland. For Southland and Otago, a few showers spreading north, but fine tomorrow, apart from isolated afternoon showers there as well. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers clearing this afternoon, but returning tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to have you with us. A busy program tonight. Let's get underway. The new Labour-led government is now officially in place. And as our Bulletin's editor, Dennis Welsh, described to us this afternoon, there are 2 stages in the life of a government. First, you're sworn in, then you're sworn at. For the new Labour-led government, today was very much the first stage. And after meeting the Governor-General, Dame Patsy Reddy, for the swearing-in ceremony, our new Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her ministers arrived back at Parliament this afternoon to a rapturous welcome from a large crowd. Our political reporter Sarah Robson was there.
Your Excellency, I submit for your signature a warrant appointing Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister of New Zealand.
At a ceremony at Government House this morning, Jacinda Ardern was officially sworn in as New Zealand's 40th Prime Minister. She and her ministers signed their warrants and took their oaths and affirmations under the watchful eye of the Governor-General, Dame Patsy Reddy. At the end of the formal ceremony, Ms Ardern had this to say.
We have a responsibility now to all New Zealanders to do our very best to achieve the goals of this government. To be a government that is active, that is focused, that is empathetic and that is strong.
Back at Parliament, hundreds gathered on the front lawn waiting for Ms Ardern to arrive. Making good on a deal to play on the grounds of Parliament if she became Prime Minister, some of the members of Wellington band Fat Freddy's Drop came to perform on the forecourt. When the bus with the new Prime Minister and her ministers pulled up and Ms Ardern stepped out, a big cheer went up. Surrounded by her ministers, Ms Ardern told the crowd it was an honour and a privilege to introduce them to their new government.
Someone asked me anything during the campaign whether or not we could have a public inauguration and whether or not Fat Freddy's Drop could play. We're quarter of the way there.
With the formalities done and dusted, it's down to business for the new government, with a cabinet meeting for the first time this afternoon. Speaking on the parliamentary forecourt, Ms Ardern told reporters she intends to set up a dedicated child poverty unit in her department.
I'm looking to establish a unit within DPMC that will have oversight of things like child poverty measures so that we can make sure that we are reducing child poverty in New Zealand.
And Ms Ardern says she will give more detail about the government's first 100-day plan after next Tuesday's cabinet meeting.
Very little will change, but I will be making sure that we highlight again the exact program that sits around that 100-day plan.
Is there any budget in that?
There may well be a mini budget in there.
What does that mean? I mean, you'd actually pass it and call it a mini budget?
There are elements of it that could be wrapped into a mini budget. We're seeking advice on whether that's required.
Ms Ardern says she has already started work on the ban on foreign purchases with colleagues and officials and will present the plan as soon as she is able. Atu i te whare paremata mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Now, as she travelled to Government House from Parliament in the car to be sworn in, I spoke with Jacinda Ardern this morning. You can hear that interview after 6 o'clock tonight. It is a pretty lengthy interview, big picture stuff. What does she really hope to achieve? And if you're not near the radio after 6, it will be available on the Checkpoint website page and also on the Checkpoint Facebook page. Do stay with us. A new petrol tax for Aucklanders is a matter of months away. The newly sworn in government has confirmed it will change legislation to pave the way for the Auckland Council to bring in the new levy, which the Council's been wanting for years. Bridget Mills reports.
It's full steam ahead for transport in Auckland, with plans for light rail from the CBD to the airport in West Auckland, the first transport cabs off the rank for the new government. Those who live and drive in the city will pay for a portion of the $15 billion bill, with the long-debated petrol tax being implemented as soon as central government and the Auckland Council can get their ducks in a row. The Mayor, Phil Goff, is keen to chat to his former colleague, the new Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, as soon as possible.
We're both on the same track. We both believe that there needs to be a fuel tax. We both believe that there needs to be a significant investment in public transport to take pressure off our roads. And the real question now is, how soon can we get this legislation in to allow the council to raise some money in that way?
The tax will be 10 cents a litre and it will replace the current interim transport levy, which expires next year. Phil Goff says this new fuel tax raises twice as much and is a fairer way to source the money.
I'd rather have a user pay system where those that are using the roads all the time are paying a little more rather than the flat rate interim transport levy, which meant that a pensioner was paying the same amount as Sky City, for example, as a big corporate. That clearly is not a fair system.
The money will be put towards light rail projects as well as new busways, cycle paths and roading. But if the tax is just for the region, why not drive further north or across to Hamilton for a cheaper tank of gas?
Auckland stretches from Tahana in the north to Waiuku in the south. Nobody's going to drive for 3/4 of an hour to the edge of the city in order to save just 10 cents a litre. In fact, if you go to the edge of the city, I was down in Huntly not so long ago, the price of petrol down there was much higher than the 10-cent margin that we're talking about.
Reaction to the fuel tax has been mixed. AA's Auckland spokesperson Barney Irvine wants to make sure the tax is collected and distributed effectively.
We would also like to see really strong business cases for any of the projects that are going to be funded under this proposed model. With the projects that have been put forward so far, we certainly don't have business cases, so that's something we certainly need to see.
Ken Shirley from the Road Transport Forum is completely opposed to the petrol tax, calling it utter nonsense.
I don't think they've thought it through. I'm sure when they
speak to officials, officials will point out it's not a smart idea, it's not a clever idea, it's a very inefficient mechanism, and it will create all sorts of distortions.
Drivers on the streets of Auckland could see both sides of the story.
I think it sucks. I think it's ridiculous. Why should we have to pay more?
Every cent is precious, but I think it's very necessary in Auckland to do something.
The traffic is almost paralysing. We can't move around the city to meetings. So I'm in favour of the regional fuel tax.
And we finished with one of the shareholders from Auckland Airport's AGM today, who was asking the tough questions about one of those big new projects the petrol tax will help pay for.
I'm just wondering, passengers coming in with heavy luggage, would they still be allowed to use the light rail?
I think the answer is yes.
Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahine, ko Bridget Mills tēnei.
After 6 tonight, we'll talk to the owner of Auckland's most northern petrol station. You would have heard Phil Goff talk about a little community called Te Hana. Well, there's a petrol station there. Travel 14k further north and you wouldn't have to pay the tax. At Te Hana, you would. We talked to the owner of the petrol station about how he feels about it all. Now, when Checkpoint first revealed there'd been life-shortening failures in the treatment of some urology patients at the Southern DHB, the exact numbers weren't known. Last night, we revealed that there are currently 569 urology patients waiting longer than they should for assessment or treatment. Weekend mega clinics are being held to address that backlog. Today, the DHB CEO confirmed to us that of those 569, 60 patients have now had biopsies and 50 of those patients do have cancer. In other words, 30 people who've waited longer than they should have by the Ministry of Health's own guidelines do have cancer. I asked Chris Fleming if he knows how many patients have developed more serious cancer or secondary cancer due to excessive wait times.
No, look, I do not have that information with me. When we talked about the patients that were waiting within that 90-day indicator, of course, a number of those people were expected to be reported, come back with cancers, but equally they will not all be in that same category of the extent that Mr. Hoffman has suffered.
Well, with terminal secondaries.
Yes.
You said a number. Have you any idea what kind of number? What are we talking about here?
Of the people that we have, of the biopsies that we had done, which I believe we have done about 60 biopsies over the last few weeks that have been the extra ones, and the sorts of numbers of patients that have come back from that with a level of cancer is in the sort of 50% mark. But as I do need to stress, though, that is not they are not all patients to the extent that Mr. Hoffman's condition was.
So you've done 60 biopsies. Roughly 50% of them have come back with cancer, so that's roughly 30 patients.
Yeah, they are not all patients who are going to have to undertake urgent surgery and the like. There is more conservative treatment for many of them.
Okay, but they are patients who all waited longer than they should have for diagnosis.
Absolutely, and we absolutely apologise for that. But that is the reason why, in the great work that the urologists and being supported by Stephen Marks, the planning that's been undertaken, the whole point about undertaking these mega clinics that we've announced is there's some significant improvements in processes and practices that we need to undertake, and the recommendation that has been made to me and we've accepted is we need to clear the backlog completely so that we can move forward in a sustainable manner going into the future, and that's why we're delighted that we've got the support of urologists around the country. These mega clinics are going to involve at least 10 urologists coming into our district to provide the clinics over the weekend, as well as specialist nursing staff, and that we're going to actually be able to get on top of this once and for all.
Chris, I just want to come back to that number. 30 people have been diagnosed with cancer.
Yes.
And they are all people who waited longer than they should have for their diagnosis.
They are indeed.
Okay, and at the extreme end of that category, we have Steve Hoffman, who has terminal secondary cancer.
Indeed, and I am not aware of any in that category out of the biopsies that have been done recently. And what I can give an assurance on is where the surgery is indicated as the right treatment for those patients, we are fast-tracking them, and we are utilising private capacity as we need to.
Fast-tracking being a relative term, given that it was a delayed prognosis. Indeed,
and look, I guess I can't apologise more about the fact that this situation should never have arisen. It has, and what I'm holding myself to account and the wider team on is: are we taking enough action quickly enough now to not only address the problem, but also make sure it doesn't happen again?
Can you remind me again how it did happen?
Look, it was multifactorial. I think in terms of the issues, our processes and our practices within the service need to be modernised. There's clearly been some resourcing issues, and hence why we have signed off the recruitment of additional nursing and also SMO resource in Dunedin. There was divergence of practice across Dunedin and Southland. They were operating as two separate teams, and there was clearly tensions and issues between management and clinicians.
Right. Doesn't the buck for that stop with you as CEO or with the Commissioner, who was driven, and we have discussed this previously on Checkpoint, by financial KPIs? She was appointed by the Minister after he sacked the board to reduce the deficit. If there was a resourcing issue, shouldn't the Commissioner or the CEO go?
No, look, I stand behind the Commissioner and also my actions.
Forgive me. This is a public health issue. I spoke yesterday to a man who was terminally ill, who developed a secondary cancer while he was waiting for treatment. He waited 11 months for surgery on his prostate. You have told me there are 30 people with cancer who waited too long for their diagnosis. At what stage does someone there say, this simply isn't good enough, the buck stops with me?
Well, I believe that what we need to be accountable on is the actions we've taken once the issue has been identified. And I can assure you that the Commissioner has.
Chris, forgive me for interrupting. That doesn't work anywhere else in human life. So if I drive badly but do a jolly good job cleaning up the mess after the crash, that is not a mitigating factor.
Well, I think one of the things that we're changing in the culture in this organisation is that we are not prepared to leave issues unaddressed. And the urology issue has existed for years. It hasn't developed overnight. It hasn't developed over the last few months. And we are taking the brave actions of, one, being very open and public about it, and two, seeking independent input into it, and as I've said, we have accepted all the recommendations, and we are going to considerable expense to address the issues, not only in terms of a backlog, but also the sustainability of the service moving forward, and that is despite the fiscal challenges of this organisation.
The fiscal challenges?
That's despite the fiscal challenges. We are making the fiscal challenges of Southern DHB worse by the actions we're putting in, but it is the right thing to do.
Money no object.
I have money is the money that has been requested of me to run these clinics, as well as to recruit the extra urologist and the nursing staff, have all been signed off.
And what did you sign off on?
It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I believe that's an exceptionally small price to pay to address this issue properly.
It's Chris Fleming, CEO of the Southern DHB. It's 24 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program, lawyers dealing with disgruntled Canterbury property owners say they would welcome a Royal Commission of Inquiry into EQC. Kai kora's rental squeeze and more affordable housing for Queenstown. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Thank you for being with us here on RNZ. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has promised Tainapura additional compensation for his 2 decades of wrongful imprisonment. Now, Andrew Little revealed on Checkpoint last night the government would heed a High Court's ruling and raise Mr Pura's payout to meet inflation. It also plans to set up a criminal case review commission to look at similar miscarriages of justice. Adriana Weber reports.
In 2016, Tainapura received $2.5 million in compensation, but that was based on dated criteria, and the High Court later ruled he should get more. The outgoing national government was considering appealing that decision, but the new Labour-led administration and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says they'll let it stand.
It was only fair that given the criteria for setting that compensation was roughly 10 years old, that Mr Pura's compensation should also be inflation adjusted. The government took a different view. We contested that at the time and made a commitment that when we were in a position to do so, we would make sure we'd do what was fair and right.
Mr Pura's lawyer, Jonathan Krebs, says that's welcome news, as is the new government's plans to bring in a criminal case review commission.
Having a commission, which is a publicly funded body, to take on that role, we think would be a real step forward in making sure that some of these disturbing cases from the past are brought to justice.
The Commission could also end up looking at cases such as David Tamahere, who was convicted of the 1989 murder of 2 Swedish tourists. Yesterday, a witness in his trial was jailed for lying to the jury. Mr Tamahere's lawyer, Murray Gibson, says he plans to ask the new government for a pardon.
David's case has been a cloud over the integrity of our justice system for so long that it should be cleared away, and a pardon would be the most appropriate approach in my view.
The new Justice Minister, Andrew Little, suggests the Commission could help Mr Tamahere.
He might want to wait to see how quickly we can get a Criminal Cases Review Commission established so that he can have it done in a way that's done in England and Scotland and Norway, which has proven to be very effective and very fair.
Such a commission is something criminal law expert Professor Chris Gallivan from Massey University has long been calling for. He says the courts don't have the power to instigate investigations themselves and can only consider cases brought to them, so a separate body is needed to look into cases that may have gone undetected.
They need to be complemented by an independent agency that can basically go around after them with a brush and shovel and start cleaning up some of those cases that, for many times, no fault of any of the police or the prosecutors or the courts, have just slipped through the crack, and they are clear injustices.
But Bridget Irvine, who coordinates the Innocence Project, a volunteer organisation which investigates potential miscarriages of justice, says a commission has its limitations. She says you only have to look at the UK's example.
The CCRC effectively acts as the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. And the problem with that is it does really good work, but it gives the public a view that there are solutions for these wrongful convictions, but we're not actually redressing the causes. And so I'd like to think that they might have a side project that's really looking at our processes.
Mr Pura's lawyer, Jonathan Krebs, says for now they'll be celebrating the new government's decision. For Checkpoint, Adriana Weber.
5:28, an Auckland lawyer with specialist knowledge of botched repairs on quake-damaged Christchurch homes is welcoming news of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into EQC. Thousands of Christchurch homeowners have been battling the natural disaster insurer over failed assessments and substandard repairs, and the incoming EQC minister plans to push ahead with plans for an independent inquiry. Andrew Hooker says many homeowners are facing insolvency over poor repairs to homes, and an inquiry is essential for finding out what went wrong. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
The Christchurch earthquake set a number of precedents, including the scale of the damage. They've also become something of a test case in how not to handle the aftermath. Andrew Hooker says an inquiry will help to uncover how a government organisation has handled claims in such an appalling way.
It's the only mechanism by which the people at EQC can be forced to answer to what has happened. So a commission of inquiry or a royal commission is the best tool as long as the terms of reference are wide enough.
A homeowners advocacy group, EQC Fix, formed out of group action against EQC, says around 20,000 homeowners are still waiting for resolution as a result of a failed assessments process. The country's new EQC Minister, Megan Woods, who was sworn in today, says looking back at what happened is the best way to move forward.
It's about making sure that we learn the lessons of what happened in Canterbury, and some of those will be lessons of what went well, so that we make sure that when this happens again, we can ensure that nobody has to go through what we have gone through in Canterbury over the last 7 years.
Ms Woods says solutions will be determined by an inquiry, but lists the problems that need to be examined.
We need to look at how it is that work is scoped. We need to look at how it is that we manage to get speed into the process that resulted in 70,000 homes being repaired without a building consent, and the fact that there's no third-party oversight of the quality of those repairs. We need to think very carefully about the terms of reference to make sure that we're getting the issues all covered.
Former EQC Minister Jerry Brownlee says the new government is entitled to call for an inquiry, but the Earthquake Commission has done a much better job than its critics say. He says EQC has stood behind homeowners seeking help for defective repairs, the extent of which is overstated.
While there will be some serious ones, obviously, among 167,000 repairs, some are going to be matters that were missed or other such. Many others are relatively minor things. So, I think it's only important to say that EQC hasn't gone away. It hasn't abandoned its claimants.
Advocacy group EQC Fix spokesperson Melanie Burke says news of an inquiry is long overdue. She says the problem is not with unresolved claims, but with the assessment process, and it can't be allowed to happen again.
So it's not about homeowners wanting money or anything along those lines. It's ensuring the homes are repaired correctly, so if there's a future event, the claims won't be declined, and we already have examples of that now out of the Kaikoura quakes.
After the Kaikoura quake, private insurers took over earthquake claims on behalf of EQC to reduce duplications in the assessments process. But Ms Burke says change is needed to ensure assessments are not compromised by concern over cost.
If that's the problem that the government has and they need to change the EQC Act, that's why it's absolutely critical we have a Royal Commission of an inquiry to understand who's made these decisions.
Andrew Hooker says he still gets calls from people who have just found out repairs to their homes were not done properly 7 years after the quake.
These people trusted EQC. These people took EQC's word for it that the houses had been repaired properly, and are only just now finding out that these repairs were botched.
Mr Hooker says an independent organisation is needed to handle assessments, and that's something that might come out of an inquiry. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
There's a certain amount of poetic justice in that because I was just being razzed by the person who didn't play the sting. Hey? Coming up, an insight into the rapidly growing business Eat My Lunch, Kaikoura's rental market at crisis point, and the American music legend Fats Domino dies at the age of 89. We were just discussing his very rich life. Notice next with business, but first, Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Yes, the Prime Minister has revealed some early details of her new government's plans. They include a possible mini budget within the first 100 days and a dedicated child poverty unit. The new cabinet met for the first time this afternoon after ministers were sworn in. And Jacinda Ardern says increasing Taina Pora's compensation is the fair and right thing to do. Mr Pora was awarded $2.5 million compensation for being wrongfully jailed for 2 decades for rape and murder. But the High Court ruled it should be raised to match inflation. Mr Pora's legal team has assessed the extra amount would be $500,000 to $600,000. The Auckland Council aims to bring in a regional fuel tax as soon as possible once the law has been changed, as promised by the new Transport Minister. The charge of 10 cents a litre will help pay for the $15 billion worth of light rail in Auckland, as well as new busways, bike paths and roading. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says the tax is the fairest way of raising the money to pay for transport projects. The newly sworn-in Earthquake Commission Minister says analysing the mistakes of Christchurch is needed to avert future problems elsewhere. Megan Woods plans to push ahead with plans for a Royal Commission into the natural disaster insurer. Thousands of Christchurch homeowners are said to be still battling the Commission over failed assessments and substandard repairs. And hundreds of thousands of mourners have gathered along the route of the funeral procession for the late King of Thailand, who died a year ago after 7 decades on the throne. Today, his son is presiding over the Buddhist funeral rituals, which include the blessing of the funeral of the late King's urn by monks at the Grand Palace in Bangkok. And those are the news headlines.
Thank you very much, Anna Thomas. It's turned to business news now with Nona Peltier. The country's biggest bank, ANZ, has posted a record profit. Nona, revenue increase, what did it make?
You will be surprised, John. Yes, they made $1.78 billion.
Holy moly.
That's a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yep. And they made it because they were quite shrewd in the way that they were...
Quite shrewd. There's nothing quite about $1.7 billion.
Well,
that's just...
hey, it's not easy work, I'm sure.
Involved.
It's not easy work, no. Okay, so what did they do? They had a modest rise in lending, but they did a lot better on the deposit side, and they reduced their cost of international borrowing. They also had fewer bad debts, reflecting the strength in the New Zealand economy.
This is a margins business, isn't it?
Well, it is if you are...
Yeah, so if you're an ANZ depositor, call them tomorrow and say, I want more money. $1.7 billion.
Are you a customer? Are you going to give them a call?
Get on the phone.
All right, well, okay. Well, I mean, if you are a customer, you might want to find out. I'm not sure if that will work for you. But in any case, the company did make a pretty good profit, record profit. But... overall, I mean, some of their margin pressures have eased, and so, yeah, it's...
I'm just getting out the world's smallest violin. Nona Peltier, $1.7 billion. What was it? I remember
1.78.
Yeah, I remember last year they topped $1 billion, right? And that was big news at the time.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. This is their full year profit, mind you, okay?
Yeah,
so I think the last time I talked to you was not.
Okay, right, thank you, Nona.
Okay, there we go. Now, what else do I have for you?
Freight and courier business Flyaway.
Yeah, now here's a company that listed on the NZX a couple years ago. Are you familiar with this company?
Yeah, well, you've talked about Flyaway before, haven't you?
Yeah. This is a small company. Well, small. It's not that small. I mean, they've been offered, what, 55, the offer they've received values the company at $55.4 million. It's not exactly small.
Who is the bidder? A Singaporean company?
Yeah, Singapore. I think they're in the transport business. Their company is called Yang Key Group. They've entered into a scheme of arrangement with with Flyaway, and Flyaway is owned by the Hawkesby family. Duncan, and I think his wife, her name is Gretchen. She's the daughter of Graham Hart.
Graham Hart, sorry.
Yes, that's right. Anyway, so they saw the merits of this offer and have decided to take it up. So yeah, right now they're going to have to get shareholder approval, and they're going to have to get High Court approval. That saw their share price rise more than 10%. So to $1.19, that's a rise of 11 cents. But, John, that wasn't enough to lift the market overall.
Well, small market cap for Flyaway, right? So
yeah,
not much
small.
weighting on the index.
No, hardly any.
So what did the market do overall?
Actually, well, the market, it fell 0.4% by 36 points to 8,087. And we've seen that pullback on Wall Street, also in the Asian markets. Yeah, I guess there were some bad corporate reports out of New York, which sort of kind of took the shine off the really strong market. We're still at 8,087. That's not exactly weak. In terms of the dollar, we're steady at 68.9 US cents, 89.4 Australian, and 51.9 pence.
Nona Peltier with the business news here in the Auckland studio. Thank you so much. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has identified child poverty as one of her new government's key focuses. She's made herself the minister. Over the coming months, the new Minister for Child Poverty is expected to meet with organisations at the coalface that provide food for hungry children at low decile schools. Well, one of those groups is Eat My Lunch. If you're not familiar with how they work, the premise is simple. You buy yourself a lunch, and some of that money provides a more simple lunch for a hungry student. It has been a rapid expansion. Since its inception 2 years ago, the company has expanded to Wellington and Hamilton. And last month it announced a partnership with Foodstuffs and has started selling dinners. Next week it will also launch a book. But beyond its achievements, how much do we know about Eat My Lunch? Zach Fleming went to meet its founder, Lisa King, and was surprised to find out he was the first person to ask how many lunches have been bought versus donated.
When I'm with you, all I get is wild thoughts. 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning, across much of the country, bleary-eyed workers are apprehensively sipping coffee after enjoying a 3-day weekend. But at Eat My Lunch's Auckland office, they've been blasting top 40 bangers since 5 a.m.
So every morning we have around like 25 volunteers.
The volunteers came a bit later, 6:30, but that still meant getting up before the sun rose to work for free.
And so we've had over like 5,000 people come and volunteer, and we have a waiting list for about 2 months on average.
A waiting list to help feed children in need. Eat My Lunch has grown incredibly quickly. In 2 years, it's gone from being run from a private home in Mount Eden to being based out of this large former textile warehouse near Karangahape Road, where a commercial kitchen has been installed and the offices upstairs have just been renovated. The concept is simple: buy a lunch costing between $12 and $18 and it will be delivered to your workplace. Part of your purchase will pay for a smaller, more simple lunch for a hungry student from a low decile school.
Was one of those things that I was like, this cannot be happening.
Lisa King started Eat My Lunch with her former partner Ian Buchanan. They say they were inspired by the shoe company Tom's and a Campbell live story about child poverty. They quit their jobs to start the business. They say they didn't draw a salary for the first 18 months.
And I just wanted to do something about it.
More than 1 million lunches have been bought and given over the past 2 years. Lisa says she thinks the reason it's been so popular is transparency.
I think people beyond the age of just giving money and not knowing where that goes.
But how transparent is Eat My Lunch? We wanted to know not just how many lunches have been distributed, but how many have been bought. Incredibly, Miss King said it was the first time a journalist had ever asked for these numbers. She shared an Excel spreadsheet. It showed 15,000 more lunches have been bought than given. Miss King said there's several explanations for this, including the recent school holidays, where lunches are bought but can't be given.
Or we also have things like give tos, so people can give both lunches instead of receiving one for themselves. And sometimes we also have, corporates who will actually buy all the lunches for a school for a year. So in the last couple of months, a few of those things have happened, which means we're actually bringing on 2 more new schools this week.
But apart from questions she's already answered extensively elsewhere, that's where the transparency stopped. I asked how much it actually costs to make a lunch for a hungry school kid.
That's commercially sensitive.
We didn't see the Eat My Lunch when we visited on Tuesday. They were being packed up. But the school lunch was a ham and coleslaw sandwich,
some carrot sticks and a yogurt.
The yogurt was gifted, the labour was free, so excluding delivery costs, the cost of the school lunches was negligible. Several businesses donate food. Brinks, for example, gives 60 kilograms of chicken a week. I asked Miss King if Eat My Lunch has been valued.
So Foodstuffs had, the evaluation.
The supermarket giant bought a 26% share in Eat My Lunch last month, but it won't say how much it paid.
Are you able to tell me what they valued it at? Was it above $5–10 million?
I can't say. Sorry.
You can't say?
Yeah.
How come you can't say any of these things?
Because it's commercially sensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
But for a company that's sole purpose is social justice, why is it commercially sensitive?
Because we're still a business. Yeah, and we have partners and shareholders, and we still run as a business. So, this is all sensitive and confidential.
Miss King has never shied away from acknowledging that Eat My Lunch is a business, meaning it's not just out to feed hungry kids, it's also out to make a profit.
We really just went with what we knew, which is like how to run businesses. But the difference is that we're driven by the social purpose. We weren't driven about making money. We didn't actually think we were going to make any money.
But it is making money. It started turning a profit within 6 months. That's almost unheard of for new businesses. I asked for a copy of Eat My Lunch's most recent annual return. The answer was no. She said it's private company information.
The way that we work is, and any business works, is that you always have a margin. So the lunch costs you the $12. No, it doesn't cost $12 to make it. Otherwise, we wouldn't make any money off that. So again, we're just applying really savvy commercial business principles to how we run the organisation to make sure that we're commercially sustainable in the future, and then we can keep bringing on more schools.
There's no doubt Eat My Lunch is doing good. 565,781 children in 51 schools have been fed lunch as a result of it. But what we don't know is how much money is being made on the back of that good. Ms King says she'd love to partner with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in her new portfolio of child poverty reduction, even though that means ultimately she may kill her own business.
Organisations like ours shouldn't need to exist in New Zealand.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
5:45, 1 year on from the Kaikoura earthquake, the rental market is being squeezed so tightly there that there's simply nowhere to live. This is because many of the surviving homes have been rented to construction workers, forcing some long-term residents to pack up and leave. Logan Church reports on this.
Miriam Guthrie has lived in Kaikoura all of her life. She owns a hair salon on the town's main street, but she says she can't find anywhere to live.
At this stage, I'm looking at transferring to Christchurch maybe, because I haven't, it's just a nightmare.
Miriam rented before the earthquake, but was given notice to leave to make way for contractors who pay higher rents. She believed finding another rental would be easy, given she's lived in Kaikoura all of her life. But her search was futile, with construction workers snapping up a large proportion of the available accommodation. Ms Guthrie says she has no option but to leave her hometown of 40 years.
My business has become so difficult because I have no staff and I can't work it. I can't work the business as it is because it's in a busy area and it's a really busy shop and I have no staff. And yeah, so I've got about 4 weeks left in my lease, so it's sort of without a house and without potential business, I'm sort of looking at leaving.
Jason Hill owns Cooper's Catch, a fish and chip shop on Kaikoura's main street, and he says he has lost staff due to the lack of accommodation.
We have one worker in particular who has actually resigned, and she does not want to resign. She has a family of children who are grown up, and they're probably going to follow her as well. So just with that one family leaving, it will affect 4 businesses in Kaikoura.
Kaikoura's recovery manager, Danny Smith, says Kaikoura has seen a 30% population boost post-earthquake due to the influx of workers. There are currently no properties for rent in Kaikoura on the TradeMe Property and realestate.co.nz websites. About 300 workers have been housed in a temporary village, but some have had to be housed in other accommodation, such as holiday homes. Mr Smith says there is no easy fix to ease the pressure on accommodation.
There's in excess of 1,000 workers here on the road, most of them working 24 hours a day to get it open. To get it stable, and so they needed to be housed.
There are 30 households on a government waiting list for temporary accommodation, while new builds are completed or earthquake-damaged properties are repaired. A spokesperson says they are trying to match those households to available accommodation in the town, from caravans and portable cabins to private tenancies. But Jason Hill says the housing shortage will make it hard to maintain staffing numbers at the level required for summer.
Yeah, one thing we have considered is do we actually reduce our hours to kind of squash it in with the staffing? You know, we really don't know at the moment. We're just doing our best to recruit and train. So at the moment we're probably recruiting a little bit earlier than we normally would, but it's kind of a cost that we have to incur to get people trained up and ready.
Miriam Guthrie only has 4 weeks until she has to make the final call about whether to leave her hometown. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
The Crown says a man who fatally stabbed 2 people at an Auckland pawn shop was in a state of delusional jealousy but was not legally insane. The Defence and Crown both agree Zan Tarapata killed the pair in Takanini in July 2014. But it's what was going on inside his head at the time that is in dispute. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Zan Tarapata is charged with murdering the owner of Easy Cash pawn shop, 69-year-old Paul Fanning, and the shop manager, 47-year-old Paul Matthews. Mr Tarapata's lawyer, Jonathan Krebs, argues his 27-year-old client was insane at the time. The Crown says Mr Tarapata believed his partner Tamara Cassie, who worked part-time at the shop, was having an affair or being sexually exploited by the 2 men. In short, he was motivated by delusional jealousy. In his opening address to the jurors, the Crown prosecutor Richard Marchant said Tarapata's 2 children were in the car outside and Miss Cassie was serving a customer when Tarapata went into the back of the shop and stabbed both men as they ate their noodles in the kitchen.
You may think to yourself, well, that is crazy.
It's unhinged. It's madness. However, there is a big difference between what you and I might think is insane and what the law defines as being insane. A big difference.
He said the legal test for insanity was much more than delusion, paranoia or schizophrenia, and despite Mr Tarapata having all three, he didn't meet the test.
He knew what he was doing, he intended to kill them, and importantly, ladies and gentlemen, he understood at the time that he was doing these things that it was morally wrong.
Mr Marchant said after the killing, Mr Tarapata read his Bible in the car as his partner drove them out west. Mr Tarapata said he wanted to wash his hands and they stopped at the Avondale racecourse where he buried a knife in a garden bed. When they got home, Mr Tarapata put his clothes in the wash and cleaned blood from the footwell of the car. Later they drove to Mr Tarapata's parents' home in Huntly where he was arrested, but not before he had accused his own father of sleeping with Miss Cassie.
It's very clear that this man was very unwell at the time of these murders. No dispute about that. But the Crown says he knew what he was doing, he intended to kill these men, he knew what he had done was morally wrong, and he set about to conceal, hide evidence.
Mr Marchant told the jury they would be helped by evidence from psychiatrists, but the decision was in their hands, not a panel of psychiatrists. On behalf of Mr Tarapata, Mr Krebs gave a brief opening address.
We don't live in the dark ages, we live in a first world country. We recognise that sometimes a person ought not to be criminally liable for their actions because they suffer a disease of the mind and are legally insane.
He said in Mr Tarapata's case that disease of the mind was schizophrenia, and he didn't appreciate that what he was doing was morally wrong.
When he eventually spoke to psychiatrists, he explained that he was commanded by God to commit these two homicides.
The trial's been set down for 3 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gayahau.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's 8 minutes to 6. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Here is a sample of it. This from Bob. John, you have to say that both the CEO and the board of the Southern DHB failed in their respective duties and should all be replaced. Well, of course, Bob, there isn't a board. There's the commissioner. The minister sacked the board, but I think that's what you're referring to. Thank you. Sorry, John, but that CEO of the Southern DHB is not fit to run a jumble sale, let alone a DHB, says Mike. How brave is he for not doing a bad job for years and only trying to fix it when caught? That guy and the commissioner need to be put on trial. Arthur says it's clear that the CEO and commissioner at the Southern District Health Board just don't accept that their incompetence has caused the problems that exist. One can only hope that the new minister removes these individuals. Talk about a failure of responsibility with apologies that just don't cut it. This person thanks us for the interview. Money has clearly been more important than lives, they say. So sad. Ted from Dunedin says Chris Fleming should go and the commissioner should take a walk. Unbelievable, these people. Nick says, gosh, John, how much is Chris Fleming paid to spout such Weasley gobbledygook? And this person says they were shouting at the radio. Absolutely, the Southern DHB CEO and Commissioner should be accountable. He said this has been a problem for years, so why not addressed? Restorative justice may be more effective than requiring a resignation, meeting with patients and families affected, including those staff who had a toxic relationship, etc. There is no patting on the back warranted at this stage. How can he be delighted about anything to do with this? Thank you for your feedback. Lots of it about the Southern DHB tonight. New Zealand war commemorations are being held this weekend to remember those who died during the wars and acknowledge how those battles throughout the country shaped our history. Now, as part of the commemorations, RNZ has launched a special online project, including a half-hour documentary called The NZ Wars, The Stories of Rua Peka Peka. The Northern Wars are where the conflicts began soon after the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, which some historians argue led to the current state of poverty amongst Māori in Northland. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes explains how the Northern Wars began.
Compared to the rest of the world, Aotearoa, New Zealand has a short colonial history. We only signed our treaty 177 years ago. And as the country's leading historian, Dr. Vincent O'Malley notes, the ink was barely dry before British and Māori relations turned sour.
An overarching theme of all of the New Zealand wars is these two competing ideas of what the treaty was about. On the one hand, you have the Crown's idea, which is based on Article 1 of the English translation of the treaty, that the Crown has full sovereignty over New Zealand after 1840, and that's the expectation. On the other hand, Article 2 of Te Tiriti, where Māori are guaranteed to tino rangatiratanga over their own affairs. And so there's a kind of a clash of these visions.
Many will be familiar with the famous story of Ngāpuhi chief Hone Heke, who chopped down the British flagstaff in Russell, a protest against the actions of a new government. Tensions began to really ramp up here in the Bay of Islands immediately after the signing. And that's because the new government changed the rules. Māori were no longer able to charge anchorage fees. They couldn't even mill their own kauri. And for Māori, it was the beginning of an economic decline that's still being felt to this very day. The Northern Wars was a series of battles which ended at Ruapekapeka in January 1846. Peni Henare is a tribal orator and descendant of Ruapekapeka's chief Teruki Kawiti, whose iwi spent a year building a pā, which is said to be one of New Zealand's most sophisticated military installations.
It would have been sort of your traditional palisade pā, but probably on steroids.
The Ruapekapeka palisades were designed to stop cannonballs and provide shelter for sharpshooters.
So we're talking tree size, we're talking 3 or 4 people in diameter as a whole palisade.
The double wall design with flax reinforcing provided extra resilience. The pā was built above ground and underneath too. Kawiti had bunkers dug out, so those inside the pā could wait out the bombardment in relative safety.
So for 10 days, it was a bombardment that was coming from like a half a K away, and they were here in these pits.
Yes, they were underground for the most part, you could imagine, during the time of the bombardment. And when the bombing stopped, they would have been scrambling to either assess the damage or repair the damage.
Food and water?
Food and water supplies, just to be able to endure. Absolutely terrifying to have 30 tonnes of artillery rain down upon you.
Remarkably, not one Māori life was lost. And when the British finally stormed the pā, it was empty.
It would have looked deserted. There were a few warriors simply to hold off the onslaught or hold off the oncoming raid to allow others to escape. There were also dead. They found some who had died throughout the battle, but for the most part it was pretty much deserted.
Some 3,000 people died in New Zealand's wars, mostly Māori.
In 2017, what are the effects of that campaign against your people?
Poverty hit our region, so it's had very much a negative impact on our people.
Te rā Maumahara means the Day of Remembrance. This year, the government will officially commemorate our wars for the first time. Kia maumahara tātou I te hunga, I hinga I te mura o te ahi. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei ko mihi ngarangi Forbes ahau.
And you can watch the Land Wars documentary on our website, rnz.co.nz. It is there. And, by the way, if you're in or visiting Wellington over the next 6 months, Te Papa is opening a mini exhibition on the NZ Wars. Tomorrow, I think it is going well through the school holidays, and I understand it is well worth a visit. Coming up after the news at 6, we talked to Jacinda Ardern. It's an extraordinary day when you are sworn in. You leave Parliament as the Leader of the Opposition or the Prime Minister-elect, you go up to Government House and you return in charge of the government shaping the country. And of course, the 9th law of the beehive is yours, and the tough work and the scrutiny and the accountability begins. So one final interview as she was in the Crown car heading towards Government House. What exactly does she want to achieve? The big picture stuff. She will answer those questions. It's a long and really revealing interview immediately after the news at 6, which is about 20 seconds away. Thank you for your feedback tonight. Lots on the Southern DHB, lots of it from people in Dunedin who are really angry about what has occurred. We do appreciate hearing from you. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. An Australian man who helped smuggle more than half a tonne of methamphetamine into New Zealand has been sentenced to 24 years in jail. Malaki Tuilotolafa was part of a group that brought the drug ashore from a small boat off a remote Northland beach last year. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The police discovered a large portion of the drugs after locals reported suspicious activity in the area. It was the largest haul of methamphetamine ever found in this country. In July, Tuilotolafa pleaded guilty to importing methamphetamine and participating in a criminal group. Sentencing him in the High Court in Whangarei today, Justice Downs said the 26-year-old was the leader of the group, present at almost every stage of the operation. Tuilotolafa was sentenced to a minimum non-parole period of 10 years. Ko Nita Blake-Person aho.
The Prime Minister has revealed some early details of the new government's plans. They include a possible mini-budget within the first 100 days and a dedicated child poverty unit. Jacinda Ardern says she will give more details after Tuesday's Cabinet meeting.
Very little will change, but I will be making sure that we highlight again the exact program that sits around that 100-day plan.
Is there any budget in that?
There may well be a mini-budget in there. There may well be a mini-budget in there.
What does that mean? I mean, you'd actually pass it and call it a mini-budget?
There are elements of it that could be wrapped into a mini-budget. We're seeking advice on whether that's required.
Jacinda Ardern says she has already started work with colleagues and officials on the ban on foreign purchases of existing homes. The Auckland Council aims to bring in a regional fuel tax as soon as possible. The new Transport Minister Phil Twyford says he'll be introducing legislation allowing the council to do so. Bridget Mills reports.
The levy of 10 cents a litre will be used to help pay for $15 billion worth of light rail around the city, as well as new busways, bike paths and roading. The Mayor Phil Goff says the fuel tax is the fairest way of raising the money needed for new transport projects. He says he'll be meeting with the government to see how soon it can bring in the new legislation. Mr Twyford has indicated it'll be a matter of months. But opponents such as the Road Transport Forum's Ken Shirley say the tax is utter nonsense and will only encourage drivers to go up north or to Hamilton to get cheaper fuel. Call Bridget Mills aho.
The new Immigration Minister says the deportation of an intellectually disabled Fijian man has been put on hold. Sagar Narayan, who is 20, was told he had until tomorrow to leave the country after his residency application was turned down because of the cost of looking after him. His father, Leilid Narayan, says there are no remaining relatives in Fiji and he fears his son wouldn't survive on his own. His local MP, Labour's Kamo Sipoloni, wrote to the previous Immigration Minister asking for the case to be reconsidered. The new Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says there is no risk of Mr Narayan being deported while officials prepare a file and he will make the final decision. The former Trade Minister Todd McClay is urging caution as the new government seeks to renegotiate parts of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. World leaders at the APEC summit next month are expected to decide whether or not the deal should proceed now that the United States has pulled out. The new government wants to ensure New Zealand retains the ability to ban foreign purchases of existing residential houses, but Mr McClay says it's important the deal's not weakened.
I think we need to be cautious in seeking any renegotiation. We don't give up access for farmers to the very lucrative Japanese market. Everything possible has been done to give New Zealand the best chance of delivering a high-quality deal under TPP 11, and the meeting in Vietnam in the coming weeks is going to be extremely important.
Former Trade Minister Todd McClay. And New Zealand is asking passengers flying to the United States to get to the airport earlier than usual to allow time for new security measures. The US announced in July it's implementing tougher security rules for all flights into the country, giving airlines 120 days to comply. Air New Zealand says the new measures include an additional passport and boarding pass check and more passenger screening for US-bound customers. It's recommending passengers get to the airport 3 hours before they're due to fly out. The police have arrested 2 men in relation to a violent brawl at the Mangere Pack and Save on Tuesday night. Foodstuffs says the fight was between 2 customers and was over very quickly. However, footage on social media shows several people involved. The police say a 17-year-old is charged with assault and disorder will appear in the Manukau District Court next month. An 18-year-old has been referred to the Community Justice Panel. The police are still trying to identify other people involved. It's 6:05. The New Zealand Breakers stalwart Tom Abercrombie will play his 250th NBL game in Brisbane tonight, matching the total racked up by coach Paul Henare, but well off Mika Vakona's mark of 328. Abercrombie, who has won 4 NBL championships with the club, says he remembers his first game in 2009, coming on late in the 4th quarter.
My first shot, my first touch was a 3 in the corner, and I got an alley-oop after that. So it was a good way to start my career, and memorable first game. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but 250 games can go by pretty quick.
Tom Abercrombie. The Breakers currently top the competition after 2 wins and a loss so far this season. Wellington Phoenix captain Andrew Durante may play in the All Whites World Cup playoff next month. After all, Durante had been expected to be out for 8 to 12 weeks after injuring his groin in a game earlier this month. However, the 35-year-old has been named in the extended squad to play the Brisbane Roar on Saturday. Auckland golfer Nick Vogt leads the New Zealand contingent after the first round of the Asia Pacific Amateur Championships in Wellington. He's in a tie for second at 4 under. Australian Shea Walls-Cobb leads the field at 8 under. And former Kiwis captain Ruben Wiki will be the New Zealand flag bearer at the opening ceremony for the Rugby League World Cup in Melbourne tomorrow night. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, things get surreal with the director Miranda Manasiadis, one of the brains behind a new dance and drama production inspired by Salvador Dali, and the thing he had for lobsters. I thought it was clocks. Our Changing World takes a look inside the human body, the home to millions of organisms. While this week's cultural ambassador Mona Lynn Corteau introduces us to the 4-square Latin American beat of cumbia on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers in Auckland and Coromandel, but they will clear. It will be cloudy tomorrow, and the showers will return. Waikato to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty, Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape. Fine, but rain will develop tomorrow morning, and it will be briefly heavy north of Taupo, followed by scattered showers from the afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine spells and isolated showers. The occasional rain developing north of Napier tomorrow with scattered showers elsewhere. Manawatu to Wellington, mainly fine with isolated showers tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, mainly fine, scattered afternoon showers tomorrow, mainly about the ranges. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine, but a few showers about Fiordland. Canterbury, fine, apart from isolated showers from this evening. This evening, often cloudy tomorrow with scattered showers mainly inland. Southland and Otago, a few showers also spreading north, but it will be fine tomorrow apart from isolated afternoon showers there. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the few showers clearing this afternoon, this evening, but returning tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Jacinda Ardern is Prime Minister. She left Parliament for Government House at 10:30 this morning. It's a short trip as the crow flies, but perhaps the single biggest journey in New Zealand politics. When you arrive, you're sworn in. When you return, it's to the 9th floor of the Beehive as Prime Minister. Then the tough stuff begins, the stuff that will define you and, of course, the country. So we talked to Jacinda Ardern one last time before the tough stuff begins. We called her in the car on the way to Government House to become PM.
Hello, John.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, well, I'm good. I mean, I'm not driving to Government House to become the Prime Minister.
No, well, I was just sitting here and thinking about actually my sister who's in London and just had a baby this morning. So today just feels generally a very big day.
Yep, a baby and becoming PM in the same family in the same day. That's pretty big. What did your sis have?
She's had a little boy. Well, not a little boy,
Oh,
a
no.
large boy. 9.4 pounds.
Goodness gracious me.
Wow.
What a day in the Ardern family.
Yeah, absolutely. It does mean that my mum is over in London with her, but my father is here, which is lovely.
He'll be up there at Government House waiting, your dad, as proud can be. And you are in the car on the way up there. Where are you now? Tell us about your journey. You're in the back of the car?
Yes, I'm roughly next to a subway and a set of jackhammers by Archives New Zealand. So we're about a 10 to 15 minute drive away.
And when you return, the next time you're back in Parliament, you will be the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand.
That is correct.
It's an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it truly is. And I think there's a significant part of me, whilst I feel a huge, enormous sense of privilege. You know, you walk down the halls of Parliament and you see the portraits of those who have been lucky enough to hold the role before, and there's not many faces, and so I do feel enormously privileged. But at the same time, there is a significant part of me that just is just totally focused on the work that needs to be done. You know, we've called our first cabinet meeting this afternoon. We'll have another on Tuesday. Preparation's already begun for APEC. I think there's probably just a case for everyone. Not a lot of time to process. You just, once you're there, get on with it.
Yes, that's what you're there to do. But get on with what? And I guess from now on, once you've become Prime Minister, the interviews you do are going to be full of costings and scrutiny and rigour, as is appropriate. So have, in the car on the way up to Government House, have one last idealistic flourish, untethered, big picture stuff. What is it you want to do?
I want this government to feel different. I want it to feel like we are a government that's truly focused on everybody. And perhaps I'm more acutely aware of that sense, having now led a set of negotiations and now a government that brings together a range of parties. I know I need to transcend politics in the way that I govern for this next term of Parliament. But I also want this government to feel different. I want people to feel that it's open, that it's listening, and that it's going to bring kindness back in everything that we do and the way that we think about issues. And I know that will sound curious, but to me, if people see they have an empathetic government, I think they'll truly understand that when we're making hard calls, that we're doing it with certainly the right goal, the right focus in mind. And so that's the feeling I want this government to create.
The responsibility for kindness, for empathy. I have a sense from your maiden speech that you first became aware of that sense of responsibility, I guess, when you were young in Murupara, where your dad was the police sergeant, and you began to understand that life is not a level playing field. Do you have a sense of obligation to what you learnt during those moments of your childhood?
Absolutely. I think, though, that you get, those were memories of mine that are long ago. And I get fresh reminders of that every day. I have to admit, during the negotiations, it was a tough period of talks, as you would imagine, and lengthy, as everyone observed. But there was one evening when I was walking home, and it was quite late at night, and I was thinking about where we were at, and there were two young men sleeping in a shop near a shop window, and these acute reminders that as much as we can sometimes draw in a bit and talk about the politics of what we do and the raw politics of what we do, actually, it's not about just preserving people's political careers, or it's not about power. It's about being in the position to make a difference to people who need it most. And we get those daily acute reminders. I know, though, that all of the big challenges that we want to address as a government, we are not going to be able to do alone. So the other sense I want people to have is that this will be a government that works with others, that works with the business community, that works with NGOs, with Māori and iwi, with everyone who shares our goals. We need to build a partnership with, because there is a lot to do.
Yeah, there sure is. In that answer you mentioned homeless people, and you mentioned the business community. And empathy is a word you use. And I wonder if you see that as central to how you want to be Prime Minister, the ability to see the world from points of view that aren't your own.
And, if politicians often accused of being out of touch, empathy is the one thing that I think, that's your foundation, that's your grounding, and we'll keep ourselves in constant check.
Where are you now? Describe your journey. Where are you?
I'm outside KFC. I'm using food-based landmarks for you now.
I suspect you've had the odd late-night trip to KFC in the past, have you?
There's been a few more burgers than I'd care to admit,
right.
but I don't think I've had a bucket of chicken of late.
Yeah. All of that kind of changes now, doesn't it? And a previous Prime Minister who I knew a little bit said, you don't change. You still want people to know you're the same person, but everyone around you changes, and the expectations of the kind of stuff you can do, the late night burgers and, all of that suddenly gets set aside.
And perhaps I'm being slightly unrealistic to think that, that you can hold on to a bit of that still. Last night with Clark, we just walked down Cuba Street and stopped and picked up a burger, just like as we otherwise would. We just happened to have a bit of company with us as we did it. So I hope that elements of life can stay the same, but I equally expect that it's a busy job. There's no doubt there will be a lot that changes.
Yes, I saw on Twitter last night that you were out and about, descriptions of people screaming with delight as you and Clark walked along Cuba Street. What do they want from you, the people who were screaming at you last night? What do they want from the 40th Prime Minister of New Zealand?
I think they just probably want us to make good on all of the things we said we'd try our best to achieve. I think we've got a big job to do to try and restore faith in politics and politicians. And I know politicians are desperate for that too. Regardless of the side of the house that you're on or the party you belong to, I genuinely believe that we're all there to make New Zealand an even better place. We just have very different ideas of what that means. And so I think it's about really just following through. And when we fail, acknowledging that we've failed. When we haven't been able to reach our goal, telling people why. But I think New Zealand is a pretty forgiving people, as long as you're always upfront and transparent. And so that's what I think they expect of us.
Congratulations, Jacinda Ardern, on becoming Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Thanks so much. Thanks for joining me on this journey.
It's been our privilege. I know everyone listening will feel that, and I hope the swearing in goes wonderfully.
Thank you so much.
Jacinda Ardern in the Crown car as she drove from Parliament to Government House to be sworn in as Prime Minister this morning. Auckland will soon be hit by a 10 cents a litre petrol tax as the new government looks for ways to pay for better public transport. What about those petrol stations on the fringes of the city? And Auckland is a big area, so the fringes are a long way north and south. Will they still get the business when just over the border in Waikato and Northland Whangarei? The petrol stations will be selling petrol much cheaper. I spoke to Himanshu Jan, who owns the most northern petrol station in the Auckland region in a little town called Te Hana.
I'm the end part of Auckland in a rural area.
And then the next petrol station north of you is...
They don't need to pay because they come on the Northland district.
And how close are they to you?
It's 14.7 kilometres if you look on the Google.
So 14.7 kilometres away, the petrol station there can charge 10 cents a litre less.
Yeah.
So Himanshu, where do you think people will go and fill up?
Definitely they'll go another 15 k's. It's only 10 minutes drive. It's very common sense, man. 10 cents more.
I hate to say this, Himanshu, but it is common sense. You would, wouldn't you, if you had the choice?
Pardon?
So what will this do to your business?
It will hit my business a lot, man. Definitely. Because, see, I'm on a State Highway 1. People travel a lot on the State Highway 1. It's very simple. And the person who's coming from Auckland, he knows that once he crosses, if he's going to Whangarei from Auckland, he knows that once he crosses Tihana, wherever he fills, he gets a cheaper fuel. And these days, the fuel prices are like that. They always go for the cheaper price. And anybody who's traveling from that side, from Whangarei side to Auckland, he knows that before he reaches Tihana, there's a place, Kawaka or Diffen. If he fill up there, he don't need to fill up in the Auckland, so he get a cheaper price again.
So you think you will lose customers as a result of this?
Yeah, and because my mostly customers are from Mangawhai and the Kaiwaka region, because Wellsford people don't come to me. Wellsford people fill in Wellsford town only.
Right. So are you worried about your business?
Well, definitely. It's going to hit me a lot.
Himanshu Jain, he owns a petrol station at the northernmost point of the Auckland region. Just beyond him, the petrol increased tax, regional tax will not apply. Lots of stick coming from the rest of the country tonight, particularly the South Island, saying, get over yourselves, Aucklanders. Even with the petrol tax, your petrol will still be cheaper than it is in much of the south. But in Auckland, Zach Fleming asked people at a mobile petrol station right in the centre of town what they think.
No, of course not, because I'm an Uber driver, so of course I want a cheap petrol.
Okay. So will 10 cents a litre make a big difference to you?
Yeah, it will definitely make a difference. Even a single cent will make a difference, but because our business is running on our petrol, so of course.
Well, it gives us transport to the airport and whatnot, then that's fine by me.
You happy paying an extra 10 cents on top of what it is now already, $1.96?
I'm sure no one's happy, but it gives us what we need for infrastructure, so be it.
Cool.
I'm sure people will fuel up out of town a lot more often.
You included?
Probably, yeah.
Probably have to try and consider driving less. It probably won't have a big impact over a month or so, but over the year it will. Yeah. And I don't know, if the public transport was really good too, I wouldn't mind doing that.
So that's the trade-off, right? You pay more tax in the short term and then long term you get a bit of public transport. Are you happy with that trade-off?
Yes, so long as the public transport would be really good. I mean, it's improving, but it needs to be better.
I actually drive a company car, so it doesn't matter to me at all, but trying to be more holistic about it, I don't think it's the right approach, but I don't have an alternative.
If you didn't drive a company car, do you think a trade-off of paying more fuel to get better public transport is fair, or are there other ways that we should fund it?
I think that there's other ways that we should try and fund it. Yeah, I think that if people shouldn't be forced into public transport, we should have better infrastructure.
I think it's a good idea, but at the same time, we're paying a lot of taxes, you know. I mean, look at the food, you know, and everything. We pay taxes, basically GST and everything. And there will be another things for the government, you know, to implement, which is going to hit us hard, I think.
But as a taxi driver, is 10 cents a litre going to make a big difference to you?
Yeah, I think it will, you know. I think it will make a big difference, you know, because obviously we're paying pretty much $250 a week, you know, petrol. So if they put it extra 10 cents, they would just add up. I guess we have to increase our prices then, you know.
Let's head to Queenstown now, where more than 2,000 new houses may soon be built, as the local council today voted on two initiatives to increase housing development in the area. Real housing shortage, of course. The Queenstown Lakes District Council unanimously voted in support of building affordable houses for the area's workforce, with an initial goal of 1,000 homes by 2028. Now, our reporter Tim Brown was at the meeting and I asked him what the council's decided on.
Well, most substantially, John, is the Mayoral Task Force package, which is unprecedented in New Zealand. It has a goal of housing the entire area's workforce affordably by 2048. It's going to lead to the creation of a secure home scheme, which will separate the two assets of property, the home and the land. The land itself will remain a public asset, but the homes will be able to be leased out and be the property of the tenants. It's hoped the first 1,000 will be built and tenanted by 2028. But additionally today, a further 2,185 homes may be possibly built under the district's special housing area. Ladies Mile is now included in that, and there's already plans for more than 1,000 homes.
So, Tim, the first 1,000 homes by 2028?
Yeah, and so the idea behind those is to make them separated from the really rapidly rising asset here in Queenstown, which is the land.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last year, December, the average property price reached $1 million, and most of that is held in the land component.
Right. And of course, if you are working in the service industry as a cleaning hotel rooms or waiting or something, you're earning the minimum wage or not much above it, so you can't afford the rents there. So it's absolutely a response to that. What were the councillors' views on these measures?
Most of the councillors were strongly supportive of both measures. They did pass, but the mayoral task force recommendations unanimously passed. Everyone is on board with that. I mean, they all recognise the need for more affordable homes in the area. The growing region simply can't put up with the population growth it's going through without having more homes. And one councillor mentioned that 92% more homes are going to be required by 2045. They all recognise the need to act now.
Okay, so unanimous support and for the mayoral task force and majority support for everything really. Are there any concerns?
There are some concerns. I mean, Ladies Mile, especially to the public down here, is a very special area. It's not heavily residential at the moment, and it's located between the Shotover River and Lake Hayes. It's a very scenic area. There is 4 councillors that voted against including it, and additionally, at least one other councillor has raised issues of a new government coming in. What does that mean? Special housing areas were former Housing Minister Nick Smith's project, so there's some concern as to whether they will be maintained under a new coalition. However, there's been no suggestion yet that Labor or New Zealand First intend to repeal the special housing area accords. In fact, Labor has campaigned on needing to do more in the affordable housing area.
Our reporter Tim Brown, who was at the meeting today, a really big issue this in the Queenstown area. Lots and lots of service workers who are relatively low income, really expensive housing costs. We'd love to hear from you if you're in that region. If you live there permanently or you're there for seasonal work, do text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. What is the best solution to Queenstown's housing crisis? It's 26 minutes past 6. Lots of feedback coming in tonight, and I've just going to give you a sample. If the CEO of the Southern DHB was a doctor and caused the harm that has been caused, he would be standing in front of the disciplinary tribunal. Not knowing there was a problem is not a defence. When it is your job to know there's a problem, it's surprising that there is a massive burnout among medical staff at public hospitals when they have to work with such appallingly run organisations. I think it's not surprising. Thank you for the feedback. This is on the Southern DHB, of course, and the issues at the urology department. We've been covering this since, well, for months now. And we really appreciate all of you who've been in touch, many of you with your stories. Too easy and simplistic, says Glenn, to hang out to dry the CEO of the Southern DHB. I doubt the critics could have done a better job. The Southern DHB urology delay is unbelievable and probably unconscionable. Southern DHB is in Dunedin, the city home of Otago University, the university that spawned Pacific Edge, that developed the technology to diagnose bladder cancer simply, effectively, and at a lower cost. The urologists don't seem to like this, possibly as it could reduce their workloads, aka income reduction. Maybe a Labour health minister will be more directive. Kia ora, John. I think Chris Fleming only took over a year ago, so the way I heard it, he's fixing problems that others made a bit of balance might be more appropriate, says Quentin. The American music legend Fats Domino has died at the age of 89. Considered one of the leading names of rock and roll in the 1950s and 60s, he was best known for his songs Ain't That a Shame and Blueberry Hill. This report on his life from the BBC.
You made me cry when you said goodbye. Ain't that a shame?
Ain't That a Shame was Fats Domino's first big hit. He'd begun his career as a pianist in the bars of New Orleans, his hometown. His early records were popular with predominantly black fans of rhythm and blues. But Ain't That a Shame appealed to a white crossover audience as well. And the genial Fats found he'd helped to invent a new kind of music, rock and roll. A string of more than 30 top 40 hits followed, including this homage to his hometown, Walking to New Orleans.
This time I'm walking to New Orleans. I'm walking to New Orleans.
He so loved the place that when Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, he chose to stay at home and was rumoured dead. His biggest hit of all was Blueberry Hill in 1956. His record sales tapered off in the 1960s, but he went on touring and playing, his music as appealing and infectious as ever.
I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill, on Blueberry Hill.
That report from the BBC. I was driving my daughter to school this morning on my way to RNZ, and I said, isn't it said about Fats Domino? And she said, who's Fats Domino, Dad? And I said, Blueberry Hill. She said, what's that, Dad? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the generation gap in a nutshell. Oh, anyway, it is 30 seconds away from the end of the program, so we're going to bring up The Sting, made by James Milne, aka Lawrence Arabia, who my children have heard of. And then we're going to take a shot of the control room because they've been cantankerous in there tonight. Pip and Bridget, Kelvin and Rangi. Excellent team, the excellent Checkpoint team. On behalf of us all, thank you for being with us, and we will be back. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A man involved in importing more than half a tonne of methamphetamine and bringing it ashore on a remote Northland beach has been jailed for 24 years. The new government was sworn in this morning and could release a mini-budget within its first 100 days. The Auckland Council will bring in a regional fuel tax as soon as the government passes legislation. And the new immigration minister has put the deportation of an intellectually disabled Fijian man on hold. Our next news and weather at 7.
There's a place for us. With the arrival of Nightfall, a new and second album from the trio Quercus, it's time to profile that spellbinding English singer, June Tabor. And open